I'm good.
Oh, you're good.
Yep, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you all so much for being here on Zoom. And here we have a huge group of people, and I'm ecstatic about that. I want to take a minute and introduce our two other co-presenters. I don't know if we can get pictures up, or maybe we'll do self-introductions. But I'm presenting with the two other leads on this project, so Michael Cooper and Baron Jordan. And do you want to take a minute and just say hello?
Sure, I'll go ahead. I'm Michael Cooper. I've been working together with Rochelle and Baron for the past 18 months on this project, and we're really excited to announce it.
Can everyone hear that okay? Okay, can you turn that up a little bit? And I'm going to hold you, Baron, for 1 moment. Okay, try again.
Okay, is the audio better now?
It is. Everybody else?
Okay, so yeah, I'm Michael Cooper. I've been working with Rochelle and Baron for the past 18 months on this project, and I previously worked on WCAG 2 and WCAG 3, and ARIA and all that good stuff.
And Baron?
Hi, I'm Baron Jordan. I'm an assistant research engineer at the University of Maryland. I've been working in accessibility for over 20 years now. Some standards work and other things, and yeah, it's been great working on this project.
Okay. Michael, I think we're going to start with an introduction. We're going to talk a little bit and try to just help you all orient on this project and understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. And then we have some exercises and open discussion. As we go through this introduction, and I think Michael's going to go through most of it, but pause us and ask questions. I think it's important to make sure that you understand as we go through the information we're presenting so we can have those deeper discussions later on. Michael, I can turn it over to you and I'll just move slides.
All right, let's see. Okay, so yeah, why don't you just move on to the next slide. So background of the project. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to update the latest slide deck. So we did want to acknowledge the many contributors. Rochelle, Baron, and I worked closely together on this project. We solicited review from a number of other colleagues, which was very instrumental in working out some of the kinks in the project. So those names are listed on screen as well. So that it really helped us to make a framework that we think is now ready to present and can show its potential. Okay, so on the framework, so the framework itself is located at accessiblecommunity.org/DAF. And then if you go into the framework, we get myself slightly reoriented. Okay, so if you go into the framework, this page talks about why we developed the framework. What we found was that accessibility guidance is often developed after problems are identified and after solutions come together, which can be years after the fact. Another challenge is that formal guidelines development can be a complicated process, and some groups can participate in that more effectively than others. So there's been a bit of a structural bias in who is favored by formal guidelines development. We're also looking at the rapidly increasing pace of technology change, and we need to predict what's coming in time to produce guidance before it's too late. As new technologies like virtual reality, virtual and extended reality, increased use of haptics, spatial technologies, things like that. There may be new challenges for accessibility that didn't exist in our previous environment. So we need to come up with a way to anticipate those and figure out how to solve them before they become deployed in the world as a big problem. When looking at all this, we also think that old assumptions might not be applicable to this future solutions. We've worked in a world for a long time where text is the universal fallback, and generally something can be made compatible with assistive technology. That may be true in the future, but it may not.
Okay, Michael, I'm going to pause you for 1 second because they've asked for the URL again, so I'm going to take a step back so people have a chance to open it. If you don't want to put framework in, you can just go to accessiblecommunity.org/DAF, and it will then get there. And if you have the conference presentation, this link is in the page for the conference as well, so you can kind of follow along and see it. A lot of,
Suggestion?
Yeah.
That URL is far too short. Could you add some extra letters to it?
I can actually remove a couple, make it hard, even shorter. But yeah, sorry about that. Were there other questions or requests? And is everybody able to hear okay before we keep going? Okay. Michael, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so one of the other things we were looking at for the framework is how accessibility is deployed in the world right now. Current accessibility guidelines focuses mainly on content creators, meaning that the people creating content are the people who are responsible for making it accessible to users. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, but in fact, many of those requirements can be supported by the underlying technologies, by user agents, content management systems, platform technologies, etc. When they are supported in those ways, it's a much more effective and efficient way of deploying accessibility. It can be done once or maybe a few times rather than a gazillion times. We want to focus on developing guidance that can move the solutions as far down in the technology stack as possible and emphasize the role of hardware and platforms and minimize the requirements on the end content creators. Moving on to emerging technology, I may have already covered some of this already, but new types of technologies mean new potential types of accessibility challenges as we get into the discussion of the intersections between individual abilities and the affordance of the environments. These will be new intersections that we're encountering. It's also possible that it's, as I think about technologies like virtual reality and especially the rapid evolution of how that is implemented and deployed, it's very hard for me to imagine how assistive technology effectively is going to keep up or really be meaningful as an external device. I think native accessibility is going to become a critical part of the solution, which means understanding the accessibility challenges as the technologies are being developed. There will always be a case where some people need alternative content rather than content in some other way made accessible. But what is an acceptable alternative will continue to evolve as well. So moving on to the next slide, what do we need to know? What we're looking at here is a whole bunch of what don't we know and how are we going to predict what we need to know to develop some meaningful guidances. Like what affordances might new digital technologies offer and how does the range of human variability intersect with this? That in turn means what do we know about the range of human variability? So that brings us on to how we've developed the framework. Moving on to what we've done for the framework, we've created three kind of lists of characteristics that are relevant to an accessibility picture. The first is a list of individual abilities. These are high-level general abilities that a human might have under sensory. You see auditory, gustatory, which is taste, smell, touch, visual. These are kind of basic abilities. We've identified the same for physical and cognition. We've referred to a number of different sets of guidelines and references to develop this particular list. And I won't say that every item you see in the list is perfect, but this is the list we're working with for the moment, and we certainly are open to evolving lists. But what this gives us is a range of different types of human abilities that might intersect with accessibility. Then we can move on to object characteristics. These are the characteristics of the digital content or the digital object that we're looking at for accessibility. The idea is that it's the characteristic of the object in combination with a particular human ability that creates an accessibility issue potentially. We have three types of object characteristics: content, task completion, and safety. Content is the one that would be most familiar. Just as we had for individual abilities, we categories for sensory, motor, and cognitive. We have here categories for the perceivable aspects of the content, the operability aspects, the understandability aspects. These are affordances or features that the content may provide. And these are kind of built into the content itself. Then moving on to task completion. These are aspects of the design of the content. They may not be the specific encoding of the content, but they're part of the design of the content that relate to people's ability to complete tasks. Efficiency has a lot of issues. People who have a higher error rate are more likely to not complete a task. And it also takes into account aspects like physical location. Your own physical environment is a part of the accessibility of content for you. And then finally, safety. We've identified two categories here: risks, which is some of the contractual agreements that you might know you were signing, might not have known you were signing, threats to your privacy, things like that. And then we identified technological complexity, which is sort of the manipulation that's going on in the internet and the risks that can have for people with certain accessibility needs. So those were the two outer categories of individual abilities and object characteristics. They're joined in our model by what we call support needed, which is the type of accessibility support that exists at the conjunction of an individual ability and an object's affordance or characteristic. We have 5 types. These are very broad types just for coming up with a model. After thinking through these types, we came up with adjust. This is alphabetical order here. Adjust means that people can change an aspect of the presentation. It's changing your contrast or enlarging your text or turning up your audio, whatever it is. An adjustment would meet your accessibility need. Alternative means that there isn't another accommodation that we can think of that would work, and some form of alternative content is needed. Assistive technology is where we think that content can be made accessible with the use of assistive technology. Avoid captures situations where the content may create a problem for you that you can't simply adjust yourself out of. The classic example is seizure triggers. There can also be mental health triggers and other kinds of content that you need to be able to avoid. So we have that category. And then the default category is for people who don't generally need what we would consider an accessibility accommodation. It's a description of what is designed for the mainstream, but it's an important category for us to have as we differentiate it from the other categories. Okay, moving on. Rochelle, do you want to cover these next 2 slides?
Yeah. So this is the model. So Michael gave you an introduction of all the little pieces, and we're going to kind of go up and down this model as we talk about this today because it's surprisingly complex. We've tried to simplify the whole space of human disability and intersection of accessibility into a model we can work with. And so when we look at this is the required, on the right side, we have the required ability, which has sensory, physical, and cognition, and all those pieces underneath it are located there. On the right side, when you're facing it, we have the content characteristics. And again, as Michael said, what we are looking at is the intersection of the things about the content and the abilities of the human individual. So those are the content characteristics: perceive, operate, and understand. We also have the task completion and safety characteristics he covered. When we look between something like sensory, and this should sound a little bit more like what you're used to when you think about standards, we have a sensory ability like sight, We have a support needed, some kind of category, the type of support that we're saying we should provide, and then it intersects with the category or the content characteristic. And we have one-to-one relationships there. We've got sensory almost always relates to perception. So if content has something to be perceived, a human being needs the sense to be able to perceive it, whether it's hearing or sight or something like that. When we look at physical and operate, they have a pretty much a one-to-one capability. If you have some kind of operation, like the ability to move a mouse, you have to have the physical ability to move that mouse. Cognition is similar to understand, one-to-one relationship, and you'll see this as we dig into the model. When we get down into task completion and safety characteristics, it becomes more of a one-to-many relationship. A lot of people benefit when you have good error handling, for example. It's not just a one-to-one relationship. And that's why you've got this little you got one-to-one relationship arrows on one part of the model, but you've got a many-to-one relationship model for task completion and safety characteristics. So to give an example of how this fits with what we all work with in WCAG day to day, we pulled 1.2.4. Captions are provided for all live audio content in synchronized media. So in that case, it is a sensory ability, the ability to hear. And if you do not have that, you need an alternative type of support. And you provide that in order to perceive the content that's audio content that's being provided. And we do that through captions, right now. Another example is keyboard 2.1.1. All functionality of the content is operable through a keyboard interface. The required ability is physical. The support needed is a default attribute. We always provide keyboard support. Like we always make that a default in what we're creating. And the content characteristic it relates to is that it is operable, or you can operate it. Michael, do you want to pick it up from here, or shall I keep going? Actually, I'm going to pause. Do you all have questions at this point? Like, that is a really quick jump into what we're doing. So are you feeling like you're coming along with us so far? Why are we doing this, what we've done so far? Okay. I'm having lots of head nods. Any comments? Okay. Michael, I can display this, or if you want sharing, you can take it. Did we lose Michael?
Oh, sorry, I muted. Yeah, if you can let me share the screen, then I will walk people through the data. There we are. Okay. Screen one. Okay, here we are. Okay. So yes, you see my screen. Okay. So this is the data site. So the URI you were given earlier is the main site. The data is sitting on a separate location just for now because this has been done with chewing gum and paling wire. I'll give you the URI and we could repeat it later. It's a GitHub URI, so it's michael-cooper.github.io/DAF-front for what that's worth. And
Michael, if I could interrupt you, if you have the accessible community /DAF, click on Matrix. That's might be an easier way to get there as well.
It might be. Yes, it links directly to the matrix, and I'm showing the index, but yes, you get to the matrix. So what I want to show on the index page here, first of all, we've already talked about individual abilities, object characteristics, and support needed. By the way, is the text display large enough? So I'm not able to see much. I'm just gonna knock it up one level just to be sure. Okay, so so we have the same list of individual abilities and object characteristics support needed. I'll just click in. So we have those groups, and then in each group, that's the same list that we were showing on the slide before, and the same for the other two groups. This is what we've introduced before, but what this comes together with is the accessibility statements. The accessibility statements are short descriptions of an accessibility need. We've really structured them there. They are like for systems that, or as a person who, is usually something like that. So, and then some specific case about how you use digital content. And then it moves on to say, you know, what the affordance you need is. And then we can, we provide a lot of other information for them. I'm gonna, let's see, look for one that I was using earlier, magnification. So each one of these statements has a page behind it with some information. Again, there's the statement itself. This is sort of the core of what we're using. It's got a short name, which is what you'll see later in the matrix. There's a comment link if you want to comment on it. And then after that, if we had any notes, then those will appear here. The notes are sort of questions we had, doubts, whatever it might be. Next, we move on to mappings. So this is a table showing rows, combining a, let's see, I need to update the headers apparently, but the individual ability, the object characteristic, and the support needed. So in this particular one, we used the visual ability multiple times, but for the accessibility characteristic, we looked at different ones and determined that for these three, static content, multidimensional content, time-based content, they needed both an adjust affordance and an assistive technology affordance. And that's embedded in sort of the thinking behind the statement, and that may make more sense when I show you the matrix. I'll just scroll down. Other information available for these as references, which pulls to any researcher guidelines that these came from, tags which we're not using much. So that's just to introduce you to these statements. What we've done then is what we have is 3 framework dimensions, and we've put them into a matrix. This is just a table. It's a 2-dimensional table showing the 3 dimensions. Just showing what it looks like at the start. Of course, there's a whole lot of scrolling to be done. Across the top are the lists of individual abilities, grouped by their 3 groups in the first row, and they're in alphabetical order. Across the left, the headers are for groupings of the different types of object characteristics, and then for each one of them, the specific object characteristic, again, alphabetical. In the third column are the 5 types of support: adjust, alternative, assistive technology, avoid. And because that's a 3rd dimension, this is repeated. So I move on to the next object characteristic and I get the 5 support needed types again. So this is repeated over and over throughout the database. The best way to show it to you is to make it less readable. So there's a fit matrix checkbox. This will scale the matrix down to the width of your browser, which makes it hard to see the text, but you can get a better overview of what the headers are and where they are. To read the text, you can turn on the show enlarge pop-ups feature, and then when you mouse over a cell, it will pop up the contents of that cell at the size that you were previously at. So that is hopefully helps to review this. I'm going to turn this off. Other things you can do that's particularly useful in this mode is the show cell position. When this turned on, this will just track the row and column that you're in as your mouse or keyboard moves, just to help you track up to the individual ability and the object characteristic that you're looking at. Another feature is what I call show statements. You'll see that a lot of statements are mapped to multiple parts of the matrix. And so with that turned on, when I mouse over a statement or put the focus on it, all the other instances of that statement in the matrix will show up, will be highlighted. If I click into the statement, that's the same information as you see in the mappings table here. So you can see this one had a whole bunch of mappings effectively across one row of the matrix. If I look for some other ones, this one has a little bit of more different kinds of mappings on it. So a statement can map certainly to more than one position in the matrix. The less mappings, the better, because what we really want to do is use the matrix to help us identify things we haven't thought of in accessibility. All the information that's here, and I'll start scrolling down the screen. This mostly comes from our review of established guidelines, and we broke it down into our format, mapped it to this matrix and all of that. So we have a lot of information here, but we also have a lot of empty cells, especially as I scroll down here. So this is where it gets more interesting from my perspective. I'm just going to turn on the cell position again. As I'm looking at a statement here, let's see. So I happen to be looking at. Sorry, I'm looking at physical location assistive technology related to self-regulation. There's an accessibility statement here. I'm not going to look into the details of what this particular statement is, but what I might do is look to the side and say, okay, there's an assistive technology need here. Is there an avoidance need or an alternative need that's similar to this? Should we be documenting something there? Or in this case where this one's been mapped across several of the columns, but I can look aside and say, is there a need in this column as well? So some of these other ones that are less broadly used, that might be more useful. But this is one of the ways that we envision using the matrix to help us just kind of look a little bit further than our experience and start to think about things that we haven't thought before. I think that's it for showing the matrix off.
Okay. So what we've done so far has been done pretty much voluntarily. It's kind of been a labor of love, a kind of a passion project in many regards, and we've been really, really lucky to be able to reach out to the accessibility community and ask for people to come in and give feedback and help us. We've rebuilt this several times based on feedback to get to this point, and it's been fabulous and really interesting. But we want to go forward and we want to open this for bigger review. We want to get more people to get involved. And so we are trying to figure out the best way to move forward. Right now, we have a couple things we want to do. We want to make sure that we map all of the guidance statements to guidelines. So far we've done WCAG 2.2. We have done ISO. Baron, what parts of ISO have we covered?
We've covered most of the perception ones and some of the understanding ones, but the ISO user needs guidelines are very large and very granular.
We've done the bulk of the game accessibility guidelines. We have taken in the kiosk accessibility guidelines, because one thing we are thinking of, one of the things that we challenged ourselves with is that instead of starting this from the web and then expanding, we wanted to start with the full experience of digital interaction, including the physical interaction, like with kiosks or games that have that, and then go down into it. So we've been pulling those in, but we haven't mapped every set of guidelines or every set of guidance in there. So one next step is to finish ISO, to finish anything we've missed, and really understand comprehensively what are we covering from a guidance standpoint. We put gustatory and, I'm going to forget olfactory in there intentionally, because even though we don't have a lot of electronics and digital interaction with that right now, we do expect it at some point in the future, and we want this to live forward, and it's certainly part of the human experience. We want to start tying in known research. I mean, one of the challenges we run into from the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group perspective is we don't always have the research to support guidance we know or we think would be helpful. And so one of the goals of this is to say, all right, well, instead of being reactive to a request for research, can we be proactive? Can we actually look at these intersection points and say, All right, this is a gap. We know it's a gap. Can we better understand it? Can we encourage research in this particular area? Can we prioritize it? We want to develop new accessibility guidance. We want to use the gaps again to encourage that guidance. We want to map guidance statements to solution types, making sure that when we have a statement, we can then say, all right, we know this is the effect, but let's go back to that captions. If we know that for a system that has audio content, we need to provide an alternative, that would be the kind of statement this would lead to. Well, right now, you have somebody write or do manual captions, but we're at a transition point where automatic captions might be a better way to handle it. Like we're kind of right in that middle point with captions. With AI coming in, we can start to hopefully shift things from manual author provided content to maybe more automated content or more intersectional content where the technology stack helps us a little bit more. So can we think about that kind of guidance? We've talked here in this conference about the need for AI to itself be accessible. Well, it's a new technology. Can this give us some guidance into the things we need to be thinking about? We want to add dimensions to the matrix. We're not sure we got it right. Like we've worked really hard. We've had really smart people come join us and think about it, but it's time to open this up and really get thoughts back in about what dimensions. Did we get it right? Are we missing things? Should we cut things apart? Should we put them together? How do we want to think about that? And we, again, really want to broaden our opportunities for participation. Michael or Baron, did you want to add anything to that?
Nope.
Nothing to add from my side.
Okay. So that was the background. Before we get into activities and discussion, I just want to open up for questions again. Does anyone have questions on what we presented? That was a very quick intro to our background. Okay. Seeing heads nod here as no. Any chat questions? Okay. All right, Michael or Baron, does one of you want to take this or hoping?
Aaron might be better than me.
If not, I'll jump in either way. Okay. So we kind of want to start with use cases. All of us have different experiences, and I will say, and I'm going to pick an example for me, I do a lot of user testing with people with screen readers, and when I was doing one last year, and Baron does as well, we both noticed that different screen readers use the screen readers differently. Like, it sounds so obvious, but like the accessibility fixes we were putting in for one user wasn't supporting another because they were using their screen readers in ways we didn't expect them necessarily to do. We created some personas about that. But that's kind of a use case. So now we've got a use case where somebody, say, tabs through and somebody only arrows through. The deaf-blind use case is different than the blind screen reader use case. So is the cognitive screen reader use case versus the blind use case. We'd like you to think about use cases you've experienced in user testing in your own life, in people you know, whether that's a disability or a way the disability has changed the way a person's interacting with their world. And so we just want you to think about that for a minute. And we want you to think of the least common, like the less standard, less things we talk about frequently, the better. We want you to be out there on these because that's the best way to test this. And then let's go back to that matrix and talk about whether we're actually supporting it. Have we missed things? This is a way for us as a group to think about whether or not we've missed things. So I'm going to say, can we take 5 minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and just jot down for yourself, take some notes, think about disability and digital experience broadly, not just the WCAG model, but really broadly. Kiosks, games, point of sale devices, VR, whatever it is, and disability, and write down some use cases where things fail. And the less usual, the better. Do either of you want to add anything to that?
Sounds like a great challenge.
All right. So let's take 10 minutes if you want to partner up with somebody and have a conversation, because it's always more fun. We could even set up a couple breakout rooms if people online want to do that, or you can just work on it yourself. It is here in Central Time. It is 35 after, so why don't we come back at 45 after and have a conversation. So I'm going to encourage you to break out into subgroups or. Okay, let's go ahead and start up again. So, sounds like there was some really great conversation. I would love to hear some use cases if you are willing to share them. And same with online. So we've got the ability to kind of flip back and forth. So why don't we start with someone in the room? Yes, please.
Okay, so.
There's a mic.
Yes.
Yep.
I have accessing online resources during disaster relief efforts, like in evacuation order or hurricane or fire.
Okay. So are there particular what particular disabilities have trouble with that from your perspective? Did you talk about that at all?
So I was thinking of just along the lines of if during these times there's, I guess maybe neurodivergent would be the closest, like anxiety or distraction or confusion.
Great point. Okay, Michael, do you want to show how that might fit in the matrix? And if it doesn't, let's talk about what we need to adjust.
Yeah, can you just repeat it? I couldn't hear it very well.
Oh, sorry, the mic may not be on, but
I can just raise it.
okay, so he's raising the mic, but I'll repeat it. It was during emergency relief or disaster relief efforts, if someone has anxiety or another cognitive disability or neurodivergence, how would they be able to access the kind of digital content they need? Is that?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well. Okay. So, I think that covers a lot of different accessibility use cases. I would say, first of all, there's the need to avoid triggers while still obtaining access to resources. Let's just look through. I'm just going to. I'm going to go into the data index. An object characteristic. So risks. I think. Or triggers. I forget where we have triggers. At any rate, so we are going to find the thing that needs to be okay. So we don't have triggers. Sorry, I'm this is new to me, navigating the database in this format as well. It's actually an object characteristic. We'll call it physical safety. This isn't quite right, but I'm going to use that for the moment.
There was harmful triggering content in there, though.
That's it. Oh, right. Yeah, which is also mapped to physical safety. So I think here's where we might need a different version of safety than physical safety, maybe another, psychological safety or a generalization of the word safety or something. So I'll just say that that's a sort of a note that we would take as we go through this sort of exercise. Going back to the matrix then, though, trying to put it in place. So we've got physical safety. So I'm going to look at that. I'm just trying to find it quickly. Here it is. Okay, so physical safety is one of the object characteristics that we're looking at. This is an avoid thing, so I'm going to look at the avoid type, and then we will find the appropriate column under cognitive, and sort of the show cell position is supposed to be on. Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure we're okay. So now I'm just going to scroll to the right, and we are looking for. I won't claim again if these are the correct categories, but anxiety might be under self-regulation, or it might be under mental health. I actually don't remember if we had specific thoughts about that. But so now we are looking at this position in the matrix. So the column we were at before, or the row we were at before, was a physical safety, avoid, mental health, or self-regulation. So then we would put in that use case about being able to avoid triggering content. Now, there's other aspects of the use case that are important to look at as well. I'm going to just see if something can jump out at me as something that's going to be distractions. When there is emergency relief, there may be a lot of distracting content, perhaps well meant, but it may prevent people from properly finding the content. So again, I might go into the matrix and map distractions in the same way, but instead of avoid, that might be something like an adjust mapping instead of an avoid. So I should take off the floor, but that's my initial thoughts from that.
So Michael, what is at distractions in physical location? Because that's a good point. Like, that's a situation where you have high distractions within the location, and I'm curious if there's anything there from a standards point of view.
Yeah, let's see. I think okay, it's going to be easier to answer that again. Oh, I need to fix that. Okay. So I'm going to just find distractions. So we don't have anything at the intersection of distractions and physical location at all at the moment.
Okay, so that would be a really good gap to kind of explore and talk that use case in that particular scenario. So thank you. Is there somebody online who would like to suggest a use case? Nobody? Okay. You all took a water break during that conversation. I'm sorry.
This is Baron. I had a couple that I've been thinking about recently. I think they fit in here, but we can do it as an exercise. One of them is that some people who have visually induced migraines, that they need to that certain kinds of lighting, indoor lighting, can cause them to have a migraine or something like that. So it sounds like a safety and avoidance kind of an issue to me.
It is. I think from a digital accessibility perspective, we have to look at the intersection of the lighting and the digital content. So if we were writing, general public space accessibility guidelines, that might fit. I don't quite know how to, like physical space impacts digital accessibility, but it's also separate. Maybe that's a question for everybody in the room to talk through.
So I'll give another physical space example, which is for kiosks. You often need to clean them, and the chemicals used to clean them are often scented. So it's an intersection of, it's a digital object that needs things, but for somebody with chemical sensitivity, the ability to clean it and work with it and can maintain it is really difficult. So that's another one. So I realize we're a little outside of the digital space that we're used to working in, but I think that's a good uncomfortable place to get to, actually. What are your thoughts on that? Like physical location and digital and that intersection, go for it. And there's a mic coming.
I want to make another suggestion.
Please.
Scenario. So I have a friend that's deaf. And so one of the things that he was telling me is that as a native person that's deaf, they learn the language differently. So the way they process English is also very different. Sometimes he has friends that doesn't really speak English properly, even though they're Americans. So it could fall somewhere between the cognitive processing and also the language skill in terms of the understanding, for instance, like an online manual instructions or an online forum where you're required to write something that's legible. So a lot of his friends are not able to perform at that level, where he has grew up with a lot of training to be adapted to our standards.
That's such a great example. So at that intersection between learning and cognition, do we handle that well, Michael? And I don't know, does that model work for that?
Well, I mean, I think we handle as well as we know how to. We've certainly taken a lot of look at the space, but of course we're not experts. One thing that I would say is that we did define, we separated, the concept of what the accessibility need is from why it's needed. So language skills is a category that impacts people for many different reasons, but the core accessibility need comes from a language skill. That's sort of a partial answer to that. I feel like there's something unanswered, so maybe you'd like to ask more.
Do we have the top level matrix? Like if we go to, I guess if we go through the index and we go to hearing as a dimension, auditory. And then is there any intersection there with cognition or with the need to be able to write at a certain level, which I think is what you were talking about, being able to actually apply language at a certain level?
So I'll go back to the matrix for that. So let me find
Okay.
auditory. By the way, we on the to-do list for this project is making it easier to find things than what I'm doing right now. Part of the chewing gum and baling wire aspect. Okay, this is going to take a while. The search.
Yep. And while Michael's looking for that intersection, just to give, again, background, passion project, we've been doing this as best we can. We are not funded. So as a result, thoughts on how to make this more navigatable is also something that we would welcome comments back from. How do we help people understand this?
We also have a comment in the chat from Robert Henley.
Mm-hmm.
Large areas of red color can trigger migraines. That's a digital accessibility concern that I don't think WCAG covers today.
Okay, so that's the intersection of the physical perception and the need to avoid certain things. So we can look at that in a moment, but I think that's another great example.
Yes, it is one. I think we can answer better. I think I may have finally found my way to auditory. Here we are, auditory content. So you were asking if there's an intersection with auditory and language skills.
The ability to, language skills, the ability to actually write content, and right now there doesn't.
Yeah, so a couple. Assistive technology compatible, which I think is a generic one. Synchronized captions. So these are generic, but we mapped them here. But I don't think that these are addressing the use case that came up.
No, I don't think they are either. So great use case that we can plug in here as well as something that needs more research and then needs, or if it has research, can we get that fed into the standards for it? So excellent.
And then what was the other one came up? Migraines.
Migraines from red color, yeah. So they need to avoid red color. And I'm guessing it's going to be in the same location that flashing and some of the other avoid areas are visual.
Yeah, so in this current matrix, someday we may subdivide things. Right now, that would be a visual thing. We would document a visual need with the need to avoid the kind of content that would trigger the migraine, same as we do for I think we have it for photosensitive triggers, so it would be mapped in a similar way for us.
Okay. Because it kind of takes time to go through the matrix, I am curious, can other people share their use cases? We won't necessarily map through it, but you get an idea how we can look at use cases and use this to do that. But yeah, I'd love to hear some more, so thank you.
Janine and I talked about gaming as in an open world environment as a blind or low vision user and the difficulties created by that. We discussed like possible solutions and yeah.
Can you go in a little bit more some of the problems you found or were talking about?
Sure. So specifically, I talked about trying to play Animal Crossing on Nintendo with my blind friend, and that it's not accessible and she can't play because of things like, you know, if there's like a character that you're supposed to go talk to, she can't just like find the character and the characters don't come up to you. So you have to like know where the character is and like direct your character, your avatar to them, or even like doing things like going to a shop. And so what we talked about was like if you could just have like a menu and it says go talk to this character, and then like go to the shop, go to the, you know, there's a clothing store too, and adding things as you get access to them to the menu would solve that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Other use cases people talked about? Love to hear about them.
Let me just jump in on that one really quickly. I won't go too far with it, but I'll make a plug for some of my other work. The Metaverse Standards Forum is doing work on accessibility of the metaverse, which really means of virtual and augmented reality. And we've been looking at some of those questions that you're raising. I think it's a great example for us of why the intersection between digital accessibility and the physical world, when you're in an augmented reality environment, you have to deal with what the digital environment is telling you as well as the real environment you're in. And you know, some of those accessibility issues are VR accessibility issues with various solutions that actually we do hope to use this framework to help develop as well.
Great.
Hi. I have to admit, I was looking at my messages and getting questions from a developer asking why a tooltip is not accessible on mobile apps, and asking me, after I gave the success criterion, why it fails, for accessible examples because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And I'm like, well, technically, and then you asked us to do this homework. And I was like, oh, I've covered this in the messages. And there is some of this in the fact that practical examples of giving information to people and tooltips are quite often I've mentioned them as good for neurodivergent users when you don't want too much clutter on the screen, but you still need the information depending on your needs. And someone said to me, but aren't they frowned on? I'm like, no, so long as they are not they're not dismissed when you move focus, and so they're persistent, and so long as you can choose when to close them when you've read them, and the screen reader can announce it when showing, and the keyboard user can focus it and activate. There's lots of paths to get to making something accessible, but it's thinking about those users, and this is what the Matrix is for, isn't it, to break it down. And I went all in at the deep end, and then realised I might have overdone it slightly. Christina was very polite and just smiled and nodded. It's all good. So yeah, that was the experience I thrust upon Christina. Yeah.
Excellent. So that interaction of hover, touch, mobile, and all of the disabilities that have to deal with that. So that's another good point.
So what I would say is that this is an example of the adjust type of support needed. Different people need different things, and you should be able to tune them. Some people do want those tooltips, some don't. Some want them to appear automatically, all of that stuff. So I believe that personalization will be a much more embedded characteristic of accessibility in the future. And I think this adjust category helps us to capture that.
Okay. Any others before I move on to the next exercise and conversation? Yes. One more.
Go ahead. Oh, there was another person, I thought they could go first, but. Okay.
So this is actually a real world situation. I have a website which has a menu bar with 3 items on the menu. And in 2 cases, the menu items are buttons that expand and collapse to display an additional one, and on a third, it's a link. And so when you think about this, not only from a visual perspective or a cognitive perspective, does mixing different menu types in the same menu bar confuse people? So you need to think about it from that. From a keyboard user, you need to think about focus and visible focus. when you have something that's expandable or collapsible, you have these little arrows on them to give the visual user the capability, but is the arrow pointing in the direction of the action it will perform or in the action that has already been performed? It's, I think, a really challenging thing to make a really accessible menu system. And then, of course, you have the keyboard interactions and keyboard interactions from a power user or from somebody who is physically disabled and uses a keyboard, and then the screen reader. So,
Yeah, the layers on that are huge, just that interaction and the cognition.
It impacts many different abilities and disabilities. Yes.
And so I think in the matrix, when you see something that's spanning like a whole long list of it, that's when we start to get things like consistency is such a need, and you're kind of touching on that with that. You've got an inconsistency. How do you convey that? How do you convey that to a cognitive user? How do you convey that to the keyboard user, the screen reader? And how do you kind of prompt people through that experience? Michael, did you have thoughts on that beyond that?
No.
Okay. I'm going to steal the screen back. If anybody else wanted to jump in? Yeah, please.
Thanks. I was wondering, like, things like website performance, like slow loading widgets, like you mentioned that menu.
Yep.
They're often really slow to load compared to native controls, but that's not really required by WCAG that you have well-performing websites, or websites now are just full of ads and spam and junk, and that's fine, but it seems like that could cause you problems and just annoy you and slow you down and all that.
Yeah, I worked somewhere that considered bandwidth issues as another disability space. Like, it isn't a physical disability, but it's a technical disability that you kind of run into, and a lot of the benefits of accessibility feed into that. I don't know, has that been dealt with in the matrix, or do we need to add that in? Like the impact of bandwidth issues on top of,
bandwidth, like
or not, or code or okay,
coded menus,
loading
or websites made like with React that loads so slow, you can't even get
But
to
is it kind of performance in general?
Yeah, but I don't know if
Okay.
it's just your bandwidth.
Yeah, I think
It's
you're
just
right.
how bad the JavaScript frameworks are now with web pages.
So is
And the cognitive confusion when you expect something to happen, but it doesn't because it's taking so long to load.
so you're talking about the impact of cognitive with performance.
Right.
So I think that's a category we need to add. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's missing. And that's what we really kind of want to generate this discussion and have this thought, so you all are thinking along for just that reason. We want people to come up with what we're missing. That's fabulous.
I do think we may or may not need to add a new category, but I do think that we have been thinking about the idea that things like well, I mean, we have the category of efficiency. If things aren't efficient, they aren't effective. So from one perspective, a bandwidth issue would fall several layers down as a cause for one of those problems. But it's really good for us to document it as if things slow down for whatever reason, this is a problem.
But inefficiency, do we have like something like responsiveness or speed of response or something? That's what I'm not sure if we have. Something to think about.
Yeah. If we don't, that might be something to add. Yes.
Well, I think like native controls work with the keyboard. I can press TT for Texas, but then they make a custom select, and I have to click and scroll, and I lost that speed I used to have.
Do you mind repeating that for me?
I'm sorry.
We do have both.
So just to repeat that briefly was just that, you know what, I'm just going to bring the mic. I'm going to let you repeat that.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just saying, like native controls, like a select where you choose your state, you can just type TT for Texas, but then the custom selects will often not have that same functionality, and then you have to scroll with your mouse, or you type it with the keyboard and it doesn't work.
Thank you. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons for slowing things down, and speed of response, I think, is something we should examine more. All right, so the next thing we wanted your feedback on was the matrix cell. So this is kind of where we got to of what we thought when you got down to a cell you might want to see. It's not what we necessarily have there, but it's what we're starting to put together. So the first thing at the top is your user needs statement. I've pulled an example here from for voice input systems, people may need the system to recognize input with non-typical speech characteristics. So if you have a voice input system, if someone does not speak with the same expected speech characteristics, it should recognize it. That's kind of the statement. So there's examples: permanent disability of a deaf accent, or voice production disability. There's temporary disabilities. You have a cold and you're not speaking the way you normally would. There's situational disabilities. You're eating, you have an accent. And the current standards that sort of cover this are ISO, WCAG, and the gaming guidelines. And there's some research, a research section where we would want to put in any research references of people working in this area and get people informed. We have the matrix of the required ability, the type, the characteristic that you've seen, we've kind of been interacting with. So that's the kind of content we're thinking here, but is there content you'd want to see? And so, like, would you want to see design guidelines for this area? Would you want to see other information that when you got to one of these intersections that tie to that user needs statement, what things would you want? What are we missing here that you would be like, wow, that would just make this really valuable?
This might not be possible, but I'm going to say social etiquette.
Please say more.
Well, it's one of those things, like, I obviously have an accent for you guys, and I'm insisting it's crisps, not chips, you know, like that sort of thing. But then, where am I going too far? What's the social etiquette? Because, like, for my lovely brain, I'm not always aware when I should just shut up. And it would be nice to have a bit of social etiquette. When is it okay to ask questions? When should you not ask questions? You know, but that, I think it's very subjective and very difficult to get into a matrix.
I'm not sure quite how we'd fit it in, but it's an interesting point, and I love that you're thinking outside that box, because I think this exercise has forced us to think outside the box in a way we've never done, or at least I hadn't done before. I won't speak for the other people who have joined in this effort, but so I love that. I love that you're kind of thinking of okay, so what's the social layer on top of this technological space? And if we get to this point, what do we think about with that? So I don't know the answer, but I love the question. Yeah.
Hi, not sure if you have thought about this, but how does this apply when people have multiple needs at the same time, that have a correlation or a intersection within the needs themselves that may affect also the outcome of the intersection in the matrix? Or is this something that you would consider as separate use cases in the matrix to look at?
Michael, we've actually done a good bit. It says question around intersections. Do you want to take sharing, and I will
take this. Well, I don't need to share the screen, but I'll just answer the question. So we have thought about intersections. Intersections, as we're defining them in the framework, are the combination. It's a bit complex, but we have a definition for intersections where we recognize that a person sharing a combination of accessibility needs may have a different end requirement than the person with those needs individually. And the database is, in theory, supporting that. What happened was I refactored the database, got stuck on implementing it, am still stuck, and am refactoring again. So I kind of just hit it. They're not showing up in the matrix right now, but we do have some documented that will show up when we finally get the tooling. And I think that's going to be an important area. We started with just a few sort of the common ones we could think of. But intersections could be a big part of what we identify.
get new requirements the minute we start layering things. It's just another, we're already dealing with 3, and that's another layer down within each cell. Yeah, So it's been hard to figure out. It doesn't shift the model, but it shifts the cell. And I think you're right, it needs to be here.
Because it represents real life situations.
Absolutely. And it's not one we lean into as much as we need to from a guidance and research standpoint. Absolutely. I think there was a comment online. Do you want to read it? Or? Okay. Okay, I'll read the online. Where does prefers reduced motion fit? The harmful visual content category only seems to support avoid, and I can't tell if it's prefers reduced motion would fall under avoid or adjust. And when you say ISO, which ISO standard are we referring to? So, Baron, do you want to speak to the ISO? And then, Michael, do you want you or me to speak to the other question?
Sure, I pasted in the ISO, but for everybody else in the room, it's ISO IEC 29138-1 2018, and the title of that is User Accessibility Needs, and there is a free version available. And so
Michael, do you want to take the preferred reduced motion, or do you want me to?
Sure. I mean, if we may find some subjectivity to those things, and I think if we find consistent difficulty with subjectivity, that might be an issue for our framework as it is. But I would say that prefers reduced motion is an adjustment accommodation. You're not avoiding motion, you're adjusting the way that it happens.
And it could potentially have two solutions that fall under avoid and adjust. I think that would be one place I'd want to research too, is like which is preferred from a user standpoint, the ability to avoid it entirely, motion, or the ability to adjust it down. So
I actually believe there are users who prefer each, so we probably want to document that.
And then I think
yeah, you asked if you thought it would be useful to create guidance on these things like the voice input. I think that could be useful because, like, I know that WCAG doesn't cover everything. So, like let's say you had a voice-based operating system, like those AI pins or whatever. They're built thinking you'd only interact with it using your voice, and obviously there's a lot of disability barriers doing that, and so those people building those devices probably could use that sort of guidance.
Okay, can you talk about more about what guidance you would want to give them?
Just so they know you can't have voice as your only input, you know, obviously for people who can talk, but then you mentioned the accents, people who just have trouble pronouncing, you know, the words that it's trying to listen for, and they may just not even really think about that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's legitimate. I don't necessarily know that they do think about it yet, so thank you.
What about someone who sounds a lot like someone else?
Oh.
There's also the instance of someone who sounds a lot like someone else, because if you were to call my house, if my mom answered the phone, she would sound exactly like myself. So how would the voice recognition know that it was me versus my mom if the voice was the only thing that it had to go with? Because it would have to be really, have really finite tuning to differentiate between
The two voices. And I guess I would ask back, is that disability related? I completely agree it's a voice issue.
Not disability related per se, but it's still, I mean, it could be.
I mean, it could be if the disability you have causes more overlap.
Yeah.
I could see that, like you have a cold and now you sound more like your mother.
Let me just jump in. First of all,
Please.
there's a difference between voice input and voice recognition. So, you know, on the voice input side, I think there's several ways we can look at it. You know, we can say, yes, voice input doesn't work for everybody. So some people will need the alternative support. However, we could also say voice input should be adjustable. You can say switch to the Scottish accent, switch to the French accent. You know, if that's something that can be done, then, you know, maybe we can document it as an adjustment rather than an alternative. You know, I personally believe the deaf accent should be recognizable by now. You know, I think there's room in this framework for things like that. And just thinking through, voice recognition, it's possible that voice recognition might be an accommodation for somebody who, doesn't have the ability to recognize a loved one's voice. There will be a name for that, a something EA. If you are relying on voice recognition, it is an accessibility need. You need it to be accurate. I just saw a headline today about how, AI voices are being used in scams, AI voices of loved ones. For people who are vulnerable, that is going to be an accessibility issue that potentially we want to look at. Of course, that goes beyond accessibility, but if especially vulnerable people are being impacted, that's something that we should into our scope, I think.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you were asking like what we would want to see in the matrix, and like from a UX design standpoint, I'm looking at this and I don't know how it would fit, but I'm thinking of NNG's usability heuristics. Those 10 or 11 or 12, depending on which table you're looking at. I think that would be an interesting overlay somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's the typical usability heuristics that we could overlay. Would you want more detailed heuristics tied to the user needs statement?
To this one for voice input. I think what comes to mind is, the big one, error prevention. User control, like maybe being able to customize how the system is recognizing the input.
Okay. That makes sense.
Just as a couple.
Thank you for that suggestion. Other thoughts on things that would be beneficial in the matrix cell that you would want to see or would help? Okay. I'm going to go to the...
Ooh.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. See what I mean? How to get the developer to adapt to what you want.
So kind of guidance for developers or guidance on helping the accessibility person help the developers.
Yes.
Okay.
How to get the accessibility person to get these items added in. I know that I'm asking a lot. I know. I just want you to do my job.
No, I think this has a lot of potential, right? Like, do I think we could do something like that tomorrow? No. But is it something we can capture and say, all right, from a community standpoint, can we start building that in? Can we think about if we have a framework like this, how that can be used to help the community? Absolutely. So that's why we want to ask these questions, and we really appreciate the insights and thoughts you all are bringing to it. Any other thoughts on what this could, and I love the could, what could be here? Like creatively, what would help? Okay. I'm going to go to the next activity, maybe not. All right. So this is the format for guidance statements that we've landed on. And again, like the matrix, we have flipped this a number of times. I don't think every single one of these is in this format, but most of them are. So it's something like, this format is the word for, and then it lists the type of system. So it might be for a system, a voice control system or a gaming system or something like that, when that applies with certain characteristics. So for a system that takes voice input would be an example of that. Then people may need, because we don't want to specify people with a specific disability. We wanted to say, hey, any person can have a temporary disability. Any person can have a situational disability. So we don't know why they may need it, but people may need, and then have the type of support and details. We are not trying to write a complex standard. We are just trying to write this kind of guidance statement that captures the need and ties it to the characteristics. So both of the left and right part of that matrix. Does this work for you? Does this make sense? Do you have other thoughts on how we could format this?
I like that it's simple.
So you feel like it's simple. Like that by itself, so she likes that it's simple for the people online. Do you feel like it's simple then? That's exciting. That's hopeful.
I mean, the setup for it is, I think the setup for it is pretty direct and I like that it would be the same across multiple guidance statements.
Okay. I don't see other thoughts here, so I'm going to give you a bunch of examples, and particularly examples that have the different kinds. There's 5 different kinds of accessibility adjustments or accessibility accommodations there. So for systems used to play games, it's a type of system, people may need to be able to adjust the speed of gameplay. So that's an adjustment. And that word adjust is already right in there. Okay. For systems with olfactory or gustatory content, people may need that content presented programmatically or need equivalent visual, auditory, and tactile versions. So that is the alternative. Yep.
I know olfactory, that's smell, is gustatory taste?
It is.
Okay.
It was a new vocabulary word for me too.
I thought I knew it, but I wanted to make sure.
And does it make sense? I mean, we were trying to keep this in the way we normally talk about it with vision and auditory or visual and auditory, but we could say sight, sound, taste, and smell. But it's not a personal ability; it's characteristic, which is why we flipped into the ability terminology. But is gustatory in most of our vocabulary? At least probably not. It's also not yet really in our digital content.
Yeah.
And I kind of pulled that one out because it's not one we think about, right? But if we have to have audio alternatives and we have to have visual alternatives, we probably need to be able to create taste and smell alternatives when those come as well. And the next one is for systems that take input, people may need to use concurrent input mechanisms. So this is one around supporting assistive technology. It needs to have the ability to support multiple inputs that happen at the same time. For stationary or installed systems, people may need to avoid reflective and environmental glare. So this is your kiosk situation in a physical location, and it's an avoidance one you may not think about in the same way as flashing in the way we think about that by default. For systems used to complete tasks, people may need to receive encouragement as they are progressing with a task. That would likely be default. Like it would be built into the system that it would let you know where you were in the task process and help you move forward. How are those feeling?
Good.
Okay.
I'm a bit biased on that first bullet with the playing games, slowing down the gameplay. What if you have an online multiplayer game where you're competing with other people without disabilities, and you're over there slowing down the game? It's almost like Sonic playing with Neo from Matrix, and you can over there slow down the game, and which in turn allows cheaters to tap into the technology and get ahead in the game.
What a great point. I'm hopping back to 2 slides here. Should we have exceptions here? We don't right now.
I can speak to that.
So partial answer I would give to the question I heard was, we are not necessarily documenting the only solution for any given accessibility need. I think we're trying to get all of the possible ways of making content accessible, and then we can work on where they should be implemented, what's the best way to implement them. I think some of the guidance that comes out of this will end up being in the form of best practices, and I think that there will be alternative approaches, especially in the VR world. In the case like slowing down gameplay, that may not be a feasible approach for a multiplayer game unless everybody is using a slowdown mode. But maybe there are other accommodations that don't make it unfair, but provide a similar accessibility benefit. That's the sort of thing that we want to think of, explore and document, and then we can lay them all out beside each other.
And just to answer that, Blizzard has been implementing the gaming accessibility guidelines, and that's one of the items in the accessible gaming guidelines. And the way they've approached it is that for particularly professional competitive play, that feature isn't available. But for anyone who's playing casually, that feature's there. So for pro teams, yeah, you can't slow down the game. But for people with disabilities, or even for me, who is just an older person playing the game, I can slow it down.
Yeah, but would that create a different layer of issue in terms of this discrimination?
Can you repeat the question before you answer it? Since you have the mic, can you repeat the question?
Would that create discrimination?
He's asking, is that creating discrimination because now we have different layers of the games? That's getting into the ethical area, which I really am not qualified to answer. I just was delighted as a person who needs to slow down games that they gave me that possibility, because I would never play competitively. I mean, professionally competitively. My children do that, I don't. But having the ability for me made a huge difference. And so I did not feel discriminated against. I felt seen and acknowledged and included. So
I will say that I think that does really call out questions of exceptions, conversations that need to happen in this space. Those are probably additions we need in this matrix cell. So thank you for bringing that up. And there's obviously a lot of passion around that one. I think there's probably a lot of passion around a lot of these questions. So on chat, sorry, go ahead.
One thing I would just comment about, I think as technology evolves, personalization is going to become bigger for everybody. And we're all going to have more and more bespoke experiences of digital technology. So, I think, everybody should have equivalent experiences, but I think everybody will have different experiences.
So, Robert online said, so we need captions and audio descriptions to complement smell-o-vision movies. It's funny, but it makes sense, which is also in sounds a good pun. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's discrimination. I think it's just inclusion, making sure that everybody who does want to play can play. And if, there's some concern about it affecting other players' level of play, maybe there's like a specific area where people who are playing the slowed down version can go and compete against other people who are playing the slowed down version. Yep.
We have one more question.
I think where it might become discriminatory is if you have top scores and somebody played it in slow mode and got 1 billion points, and someone played it in fast mode and got 900,000 points, and you tried to compare those two. But for individual gameplay, I agree that if you're just playing pinball or one of these role-playing games by yourself against the computer, a slowdown mode is, I remember I used to be able to beat my kids, and then they turned 5 and they just
Great point. So for the guide statements, the fact that we're kind of getting them and having this conversation feels like then they're successful, right? Like it's kind of helpful to have this. Is that a true statement? Okay. So I guess let me do a check-in with both the people who are here. I know some people have had to step out. We're kind of at the end of the conference, last section of it. Are people feeling like you want to kind of go on, and this goes for you and Michael and Bernd? Are we kind of at a point where we want to take a little bit and wrap up? How's everybody's energy level on this? I see some thumbs. Okay. I see thumbs up and energy here. How are people online?
Up to the people in the room, I think.
Okay. All right. We'll take a little bit more time and then we'll hit wrap up. So one problem we've run into with this, and it's one that we'd love for you to kind of, as you explore and think about and kind of dive in, not necessarily right now, but is this level of granularity. How deep do you go? Because you can write a statement, and these are two really broad statements that are in there right now that probably need to be broken out. People may need to be able to customize their interface. Like, that is really, really broad, right? So that is probably too big. We probably want to bring it down to people may need to be able to customize the color of their interface, the speed of their interface, the size of text in their interface, the magnification in general of their. So that one feels too big. Sometimes it can get too small. I couldn't find a great example of that. I think we fixed most of them. Another example is people may need to easily locate interactive components and important content. Like, we are trying to find the sweet spot on this. Like, what is the right granularity but isn't overwhelming? Because you can get too small. Like, we could break each of those cognitive pieces up into smaller subsets of those cognitive pieces. And then we get 600 statements instead of 200 statements. And we're playing with that. And I think the more people who think about that problem as you explore the matrix, I think seeing that right now it's big, right? Like, we've done our best to pick really well represented subdivisions, but it's big. When you look at something like Section 508 or the European Act, and you look at what they've chosen for their performance criteria, functional performance criteria, there's many fewer. Cognitive's nowhere near as broken out, for example, but low vision is. So they've chosen to have blindness but low vision, but they aren't separating memory from the inability to interpret numbers, for example. So when you play with this, when you go back, I just would encourage you to think about this question. Think about the granularity. And we really, really want your thoughts and comments. So we appreciate the time you've taken today from that perspective. But yeah, as you play with it and dig into it, there's a number of comment buttons, and you can comment in general or you can comment in specific cells. Let us know what you think. Michael or Baron, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, not specifically.
Okay. Oh, I was wrong. We kind of got into next steps anyway. And I'll pause and say, Michael and Baron, did you want to cover anything else? Because we've got a little bit.
There's nothing I specifically wanted to cover. I'd certainly be interested in answering any other questions that people have, whether they're more general than the kind of focused ones we had earlier or whatever.
Okay. In that case, I'm going to go ahead and do the next steps from our perspective, and then we'll open it to questions, and we'll wrap whenever we are done with questions, and we're also open to comments as well. So our next step is, frankly, to secure funding. We need to have enough funding that we can dedicate the kind of time that we think this needs to really build it out. What we'd ask your next steps to be is to share the digital accessibility framework with other professionals. Let them know it's there. Let them know we really want comment. We want feedback. We want to improve this. We want to make it something that can be used by the accessibility community in a lot of different ways. If you know of possible funding sources, please let us know. We would love to be able to track that down. But also just try out the framework, submit comments, let us know what you think. And we are, all of us have worked in standards for a long time. We can take criticism well, right? Like, we want it. We don't think this becomes good without your critique. And so be kind, but let us know.
Let me just add to that. You've seen me walk through the framework. It's probably still going to feel a little overwhelming to go into. I would appreciate any constructive comments about how that could be made easier, or just questions about things you were trying to do with it. The big thing is I am not a user interface designer, so I would take any feedback that you have on that, please.
Yeah.
We have one comment in the chat from Robert. And there is the separate category of people need the customization settings on their platform to be supported by their applications. That could be split out to the first generic statement about customization.
I agree, yeah. There's a lot in that one statement. And we could roll it up. And again, as you try it out, let us know. We think we started high level and we broke a lot down to get more specific, but it does mean there's a lot more in there. So we could ramp it up a level And that would have fewer statements, but less potential help. And that's the trade-off space. Great point.
One thing we didn't really cover too much, but we touched on in the introduction, is that we might add
Uh-oh. Michael, can you try that again? And I have no idea what he was going to say, so I can't fill in here. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm back.
Oh. Do you want to finish that statement? I'm really curious. What are we adding?
Yeah, so we could end up adding dimensions that are, make the matrix more multidimensional. But I think of it more as adding layers. Like, we're getting a high level layer of all accessibility needs. We'll be wanting you to go down to layers about at what level of the technology stack should they be met at, and at some point there might be a layer of pitfalls or something. So this is all to say, even if the sort of things coming from that question don't clearly fit directly into what we have now, it may still fit in somewhere down the road. So we should still be thinking about things like that.
Thank you. Over to you.
All right. So I was just kind of thinking about your granularity slide, because that's the sort of thing that plagues me when I try to write statements. What detail is enough and what is not enough. But I guess I just want to share kind of my initial thoughts.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, if this is meant to be more of like, these statements are meant to be more testable, then you get really into more of that granularity. But my kind of initial thought here is like, this seems like a really good tool for like exploration, discovery, trying to wrap your head around what I need to do before I even understand what I need to do. In which case, I kind of feel like, higher level grouping things together is maybe more helpful, so you're not immediately overwhelmed.
That is a really good point. Do you think levels, like if you had a matrix that was just that top level and you explored it and then drilled down, would that make this less overwhelming?
So
Somebody said I think so, but yeah.
that is something I would jump on if I were thinking about this. I'm like, oh, that sounds so cool. I'm not sure if it's something I might get halfway through and be like, wait, no, I'm confused.
That's
It's
fair.
hard to say.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thoughts, anything online? Okay. Got another comment over here, or question? I don't know.
You may shoot me for this, but I think having a ability to be able to pull up the research needed would be an invaluable resource for universities.
It's like pull it up, as in just show us all the current needs and then map it backwards against the matrix. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those funding. It doesn't like me, does it? Okay,
It's fair
We
though.
like you, Michael.
That's one of those things that we very specifically want to do. It's one of those things that needs funding to be able to do it right.
Right.
All right. Well, Baron, Michael, why don't you each do a closing statement of any type, and then we will wrap. A little bit early.
I would say I thank you for engagement. It sounds like you all have a good time in the room there. I'm really glad that to hear the conversation on this topic, and certainly hope you'll spread the word and get involved yourself, and hopefully we can make this thing grow.
And for those people who were not in the room, thank you for joining us for today. Baron?
Yeah, I'm excited about this. This is a Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I'm sure you all are aware about accessibility, but this is something that's kind of a passion of mine, that standards are a way of teaching and a way of building without practice and things. And so expanding the awareness of accessibility and the practice of accessibility. And I think that this tool, if we do a really good job at it, has really great potential to help developers, help people who are learning about this, maybe also able to help standards development in the future. So I'm excited about the potential here, and also, just kind of my head spinning around, just trying to think about all the possibilities and what this tool should look like and things like that. So I'm glad to get your responses now, and definitely hope to get more of them in the future. So thank you.
Okay. And I'll close with that you are the first audience who has seen this publicly. So we appreciate you taking the time today to do that, to give us feedback, to bear with us as we learn how to even talk about it outside of a closed circle of people who have been working on this. We are really, really excited to hear from you. And if there are ways we could present this better, come talk to me afterwards or send a comment or email to us. Let us know that too. So thank you all. Thank you for letting us end the conference this way, and have a wonderful, safe trip back to wherever you're going.
Thank you.